Hey guys, welcome back to Andy's Dinosaur Reviews, and today we are back with another Hasbro Jurassic World figure, and not just another Hasbro Jurassic World figure, we actually have another figure from the Dino Hybrids line. This is the Dilophosaurus Rex. And man, this is an ugly figure. It's actually one that I didn't have for quite some time, and because I kind of like the hybrids from time to time, I did want to get a hold of it. It took me a little bit to get this one into my collection. For some reason, it's kind of a pricier one at times, so it's a little confusing as to why, because I would say it's probably one of the ugliest figures that Hasbro had produced overall. But it was one that needed to be in my collection if I want to complete the line anyway, so here it is. And as you can see, it's basically a T-Rex mixed with a Dilophosaurus, but it's at a much smaller size than your average Hasbro T-Rex was, although there are Tyrannosaurus Rex figures from Hasbro in pretty much this exact same size range that is just the T-Rex, no Dilophosaurus parts. And that's basically what they used to create this, it looks like. And then, of course, you know, snazzed it up with some Dilophosaurus parts and everything, as well as some super flashy colors. Again, you can't dare deny that Hasbro didn't mind adding a little bit of paintwork to their figures, even if the sculpts were pretty terrible. But this one, you know, actually it kind of had some potential. If you're into hybrids, I feel like this could have been a really cool hybrid. And even looking back to the packaging that this Dilophosaurus came in, this Dilophosaurus Rex came in, if you look at the back of the packaging, there's an image on the back where it looks, you know, not so great, but it definitely looks better than this figure that we got here. Like, the head is a bit more proportionate in size to the body, and it just overall has a more appealing look. And then you're left with this as far as the actual figure goes, which now has a giant head, which these figures, when it comes to this type of T-Rex, usually do, and just a not so great visual overall. But regardless, we're going to go ahead and jump to a closer look, and we'll check it out from there. So starting up here at the head sculpt, very much so it looks like the Hasbro T-Rex. You can see the head sculpt is pretty much the same thing, just remixed a bit with a Dilophosaurus. So in the face, you can see again the overall visual of the Hasbro Rex is very obvious. The skin texture, not so great, very muted overall. You can see it a little bit, but it's just not obvious enough. Like, it doesn't stand out the way that it would if Mattel had created this. But the coloration doesn't really help things either, because the color is so bright and shiny that it kind of drowns out what little detail you can see in the first place. You can see the eye is painted with a yellow, given a black pupil. Kind of has like a black sort of outlining it as well. And then you have a black that runs over the top of the eye and then leads out toward the nostrils there. You can see the nostrils themselves sculpted out. Up here on the top of the head, we do have a crest. Again, our Dilophosaurus parts coming into play. We've got a black up there, then the top has more of a gold tone of color. Again, very unrealistic coloration for this figure, but it certainly does help to make the figure stand out. You can't dare deny that. But even the crest, again, doesn't really sport much in the way of fine detail. Just a few kind of like lines basically through it. We do have an articulated jaw for the figure. You can see the tongue on the inside of the mouth painted with a darker reddish tone. The teeth actually don't look great, but they don't look terrible. Like, they don't look as bad as their Ceratosaurus. You know, the teeth on the lower jaw are actually pretty terrible. But at least the teeth on the upper jaw, you can kind of make out some of the teeth from the others. Pretty bad paintwork, though. You can see over here the teeth didn't even get the paintwork all the way through. Kind of like is only like half of the teeth painted. But the entire mouth isn't really that great. The body color is an orangish tone, but as you lead down here toward the lower jaw, and starting actually up here on the upper jaw, kind of runs along the jawline, you have a darker, more metallic variation of that orangish tone. And then as you lead back here, you can see the frill is extended, and you cannot alter that. It's always extended on the figure. And within the frill, you have a whole lot of skin creasing, and that's pretty much the only detail you get in this area as well. It also features that kind of goldish tone, and then some black sort of showing up here and there, as well as a little hint of the orange out here on the edge of the frill, which you can see. So following along with the trend of these like metallic tones that this figure has, again with the gold here on the frill, up in the crest, and then also following along the back of the dinosaur, you can see we have that gold continuing to move down through the course of the figure. You can see we also pick up a black patterning as we move down, kind of like a striping effect that follows almost the entire way out, pretty far out onto the tail, which does at least look kind of cool. Definitely helps the figure to look a little bit striking, but the gold tones, again, not the most realistic coloration in my opinion. The back of the frill doesn't have any paintwork, and as you move down through the course of the neck, you still see that very muted look to the skin texture, just not really a whole lot going on. When it comes to the sculpt work of the figure, you can see we have that darker metallic sort of orangish tone, or maybe it's still, I guess you could consider more of a gold. It's a little bit darker than the gold we see on the frill, but that follows along the underside of the figure. You can see the arms are sculpted out, kind of muscular, like it looks like it's been hitting the gym, but it needs bigger hands. Like the hands in comparison to the size of the arms look ridiculous, but you do have articulation in this area. You can move the arms forward and back. You also have articulation in the neck, but that's part of the action feature. Here in the stomach region, you do have a little bit of blood and guts. We've got a little dino damage for our figure. You can kind of see some reddish tones, as well as the rib cage here painted out a little bit. This dinosaur is in rough shape, and I don't think it's honestly going to survive with an injury like that on the side of it. But the fact that the figure overall has a very shiny look kind of adds to the realism, I think, of that injury, because it helps that bloody area look a little bit, wet. Genuinely wet. But as you move back, you still see the same type of kind of muted detail through the course of the figure until you move down into the leg. And then once you move down into the leg, the skin texture actually looks a bit nicer. You can actually kind of make out the scale detail here. And as you move down through the course of the leg, it still looks okay. You can also see the muscle definition as well as the Jurassic World stamp there. And then moving down into the foot sculpt, again, it's not the greatest foot sculpt in the world, but it doesn't look terrible. A little sloppiness with the paintwork though, but the fine detail of the foot doesn't look half bad. The nails are painted with a light tone, and yes, they are actually painted on the undersides of the nails as well. And do we have dew claws? We do, but they are unpainted. Everybody hates the dew claws. But you can see we do have articulation in the leg as well. Very, very smooth forward and back. It doesn't move out away from the body, just forward and back. As you lead out here toward the tail, you do see a super obvious seam where the tail is connected. That is also how you activate the action feature. So there is articulation back and forth a little bit, not much. Like that's really about it. But that's what helps to activate the action feature. And then as you move out through the length of the tail, you can see the goldish tone diminishes, and then the tail is pretty much overtaken with just the orange. We do still have a little bit of that alternate tone on the underside running out, but that tapers off right about there as well. You also have a curve in the tail where the tail kind of curves away from us on this side. And then if we turn the figure around, you can see the opposing side looks pretty much the same over here, except we are, of course, littered with screw holes, as we usually are. Can't help but give us that ugly screw hole side. The only other real difference is the positioning of the leg is definitely a little bit different on this side, and of course the tail curves toward us. But that's really about it. And again, when it comes to hybrid dinosaur figures, this one is definitely not going to win any awards. Now, as far as the action feature goes for this figure, you basically have to move the tail back and forth, and it's going to activate the mouth opening. So let's go ahead and do that. So as you can see, it does kind of have like a chomping action feature. It's not so great. Doesn't really work that well, but it does work. It's just not a very good action feature. It's kind of generic overall. But as far as a size goes, the figure is pretty small. For a length, you are looking at about 8.5 inches, or around the 21.5, maybe closing in on 22 centimeters, but not quite. It's a little hard to get that perfect measurement because of the curvatures of the tail. Height-wise, about 3 3/4 inches or 9.5 centimeters. For a size comparison, there is Mr. Papo T-Rex, the Attack Pack Dilophosaurus, Robert Muldoon, and the Collect A Human Being next to our Dilophosaurus Rex from Hasbro, and you can see it's pretty small overall. I feel like we don't really need too many comparisons for this guy. If you are familiar with the Hasbro line at all, you've probably seen this figure before, or seen the smaller Tyrannosaurus figures that are very similarly sized to this one at the very least. But if not, we'll do one more comparison. As we have a Mattel Dilophosaurus and a Mattel Velociraptor stepping in here next to our Hasbro Dilophosaurus Rex, and you can see that the Dilophosaurus Rex isn't really all that much larger, just a little bit. Obviously, proportion-wise, it's ridiculous. That head is gigantic next to the heads of either of these other two figures, but body-wise, you can see a little bit more body mass on this Hasbro figure, but overall, they're kind of similar in size. So this Hasbro Jurassic World Dino Hybrids Dilophosaurus Rex is another bad figure. You know, no surprise there. I really don't know that you'll find good figures at all in the Hasbro Jurassic World line. Like, there was a time where some of them were kind of desired because they had species like the Indominus Rex and stuff in it where you couldn't really get them elsewhere. That is until Mattel came along and fixed that problem for us and gave us an Indominus Rex. So now we basically, you know, kind of ignore the Hasbro line. So in this instance, I think the only real appealing factor for this figure is the fact that it is a dinosaur hybrid that is only found in the Hasbro line. You cannot find the Dilophosaurus Rex anywhere else other than the Hasbro line, as far as I'm aware anyway. And you know, I mean, it could be kind of a cool version, like if Mattel decided to go the route of creating hybrid dinosaur figures like this, they could probably do a pretty good job on one, but this one not so great, because first of all, the base figure seems to be the Hasbro T-Rex, and it's the smaller version that they've released a few times in different paint variants, and that figure overall is pretty terrible. It's just as bad, maybe somehow even worse than the larger versions that they had released. The proportions are super goofy on that figure, and they follow through on this hybrid version. You've got the absolute largest head. Like, when it comes to a dinosaur, the head on this thing is massive, and then you just have, like, I don't know, something's really wrong with the arms. They look ridiculous. The feet are kind of nice on this one, though. Like, sculpt-wise, they're fairly decent, and the fact that they're not oversized is pretty cool. The tail length could definitely be improved as well. So overall, the proportions are just goofy. The fine detail is also next to non-existent in some areas. It's really muted, not very good-looking, other than the detail in the arms and legs. The paintwork is interesting. We very much so have a very flashy coloration for this one, as we have orange and goldish tones moving through pretty much the entire body, definitely making the figure stand out. You know, it's definitely the type of figure that'll grab your attention, but it by no means is realistic. Though it is nice to see a good bit of paintwork on it. We don't have painted fingernails, but painted claws and stuff, and paint all the way out onto the tail is pretty nice. And we also have an action feature, but that's not so great either. So overall, it's definitely not a very good figure, but I mean, it's a Hasbro Jurassic World figure. That's kind of to be expected. If you are interested in grabbing one, though, as always, I would say check Mercari or eBay, because again, it's a long discontinued figure, so that's pretty much the only way you'll be able to get a hold of one. And of course, like, comment, and subscribe, and I will see you in the next review. Thanks for watching.